Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. We are going to wait a couple minutes to see who else trickles in here. But my name is Shannon Lancor. I'm the Director of Marketing for Eagle Flexible Packaging, and I am here today with some incredibly knowledgeable speakers. They are going to be making EPRs much easier to digest for those of us whose heads have been spinning, trying to make sense of all of the different state regulations and deadlines and tailor it directly to your flexible packaging applications. So before I introduce our speakers, I'm going to get our presentation pulled up here. Okay. All right. So really quick before we go any further, a few of housekeeping items. So just a disclaimer, all of the information that we're presenting today is based on our own experience and the latest available data. We do our very best to provide the most up-to-date information, but as you know, things are moving and changing quickly. So there may be things covered here that may have changed. So please use this information for general educational purposes only, and none of the information presented is intended to be interpreted as legal advice. Now, throughout the presentation, please submit your questions in the Q&A, and we will go through as many as we can at the end. If we don't get to your questions, we'll try to follow up within the next week. And if you see a question that you have the same, please upvote the question, and we'll get some visibility on it. We will do a couple of polls throughout the session today to get a little feedback from the audience on the topics our presenters are talking about so they can tailor the conversation. So actually, I was going to launch the first poll here before we get into our... One second. So there's the first poll. So just to get a little bit of an idea of how familiar our audience is with the EPR as it stands today. So without further ado, please help me welcome our speakers. First up, we have Wayne Shilka, Vice President of Sustainability and Product Innovation at Eagle. And we also have our special guest, Lowell Huffman, who is the Director of Channel Partnerships at Repurpose Global. Both of our speakers today have extensive experience helping brands navigate the regulations and compliance in EPR, and they somehow make it all so much easier to understand. So with that, I will hand it over to Wayne to help kick us off.
Good morning, everybody. Afternoon, depending upon where you are. Shannon's just putting up a poll, our first poll. But while you're responding to that, I just want to thank Lowell for being here. Joining us. I first learned of Repurpose when I was invited to one of their Unpacked webinars. I have found them to be extremely valuable in providing information for me. And then I also listened to Lowell at a presentation at Natural Products Expo West. And then he and I spoke afterward and talked about maybe doing something collaborative like this. So I would encourage you guys to check the Repurpose website to see the archived, unpacked webinars that they have there to gain a lot of information beyond what we're going to be talking about this morning.
All right, so it looks like the first results of the polls are in, and it looks like it's actually split pretty 50-50 with people are somewhat familiar and aware but need support on EPR guidance. And then for the second part of the question, most of the respondents have completed their May 31st reporting requirements, which is great. Some have implemented a system for tracking and reporting on data, and some are not quite sure. So I think this is a perfect place to start, and thanks for voting.
Yeah, thank you.
So to start with, hey, so what are EPRs? Extended producer responsibilities. And it's the effort for, in this case, states to extend the responsibility for a product. We're going to be talking about packaging, but a product to minimize the effect that it has on the environment. If you see below where it says producer and then arrows going out either way, the incentive is given to the producer through fees to have a product design, in this case, a packaging design that, again, minimizes the effect that it has on the environment, trying to keep it out of a landfill, in essence. And by doing that, they're going to be reducing, their attempt is to reduce the mass of the material, make it more recyclable, make it more compostable. The producer also is responsible for funding whatever in education or outreach needs to happen so that the consumer understands what to do with, in this case, packaging when they are done with it. That means on package labeling to explain to them that it's recyclable or compostable. Next slide, please. So this curve, if you start over at the bottom left-hand side, you're going to see that back in the 90s, there were the beginning of EPRs. In 1990, and I say the 90s, I don't mean the 1890s, 1990, a Swedish university professor by the name of Thomas Lindquist developed the concept of EPRs. People were already addressing how to keep things out of landfills, but he kind of summarized it, put it together, and created what we now know as EPRs. In 1990, 1989, the first EPRs in the United States came to be, and they were for predominantly batteries, how we were going to take care of batteries. In 1991, in Germany, the first packaging EPRs were legislated. The United States tried to federally come up with EPRs back in the early 90s. They put through legislation and it failed. Unfortunately, I think for us it failed, but we are where we are now. And if you continue then across that curve, you get out to like 2008, where you see the line, the curve accelerate quickly. And that's when more and more EPRs were starting to be written in the United States, to the point that today, according to the Product Stewardship Institute, among 34 states and the District of Columbia, we have 150 EPR laws. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the different product categories that EPRs are for. Batteries, you can see all the different things, and then the states that have laws for that product category. Next slide, please. And you can see that packaging is one of them now, and that you can see that there are 7 states that have laws that include EPRs. Next slide. This slide now shows more packaging specific EPR laws, and you see that in 2020 there were none. In 2021, Maine first, and then Oregon enacted laws, passed them, that included EPRs. In 2022, first Colorado and then California passed their laws as well. In 24, we had Minnesota. In 25, first Maryland, and then Washington, to the point now that we have these 7. And if you take a look at these 3 projected scenarios, if we just continued on kind of the current rate we are now, we would have maybe as many as 22 laws. If we slow down, we might have as many as 15, or we could have somewhere 35, anywhere in between, certainly, or even more or fewer. So next slide, please. This slide shows the 7 current states that have EPR laws. So we've got Washington, Oregon, California, Colorado, Minnesota, Maine, and Maryland. They all had reporting dates as of the, other than Maine, had reporting dates as of the 31st of May, and it sounds like many of you met those. Um, if you didn't, certainly you still can do the reporting that was required by then. This year, so far, 6 other states have introduced bills. They're Wisconsin, Missouri, Georgia, New York, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire. What's important to note is that those states that already have laws enacted, they didn't happen the first time the bill was introduced and read in their state sessions. Often it's a year or two and many amendments later. So these 6, while they may have learned from their predecessors what those bills should look like or could look like, they may not all get passed, and most likely they will not all get passed this year. I said earlier that the United States had tried to pass a federal EPR law for packaging, and that would have been nice, because what happens with all of these states, they all have nuanced differences that makes it difficult for producers to try to comply with each state's. If there had been a federal EPR law, there would have been better harmonization, which is a term you hear a lot. Harmonization meaning that it would be one, maybe, set of laws that need to be complied with for the certain different end of lives that would be necessary for that law. Now what we have are each state has their own. They are similar in many cases, but they are certainly not the same. Next slide, please. So the things that are common to all the legislation is they have their purpose, right? They're trying to keep materials out of landfills. They're trying to have whatever material is used for packaging as environmentally sound as possible. They all require that an advisory board be established. And the advisory board is intended to conduct or review all activities that are conducted by a PRO, which we'll talk about in a little while, which is a producer responsibility organization, and then advise during the implementation of the laws. Washington, for example, their advisory board has 19 different members, and they are among groups that include manufacturers, solid waste collection folks, retailers, nonprofit organizations for the environment, composters, and tribal or indigenous solid waste service providers. So it's a very diverse group that states will have on their advisory board, trying to get a good diverse look at how things are going to be handled. For covered materials, it's mostly for packaging what you'd imagine it's going to be, right? It includes paper packaging, because we do not only plastics, what people would refer to as plastics, but we do heat sealable papers that are also covered under the EPR laws. For exempt materials, they're going to include usually something that are containing something hazardous, drugs, insecticides, and those are all spelled out in the each state's bill. There are going to be small business exemptions. They're going to describe, and they'll describe what those are. They're going to describe what a producer is. They're going to describe what a PRO is, and a PRO is a producer responsibility organization in Maine. They refer to it as a stewardship organization. We'll get to what the PRO and stewardship organization do in just a moment. In addition to a PRO, individual producers can develop their own plan to comply with the EPR law. We'll get to that in a little bit as well. They're going to all have performance targets, and the targets are going to be addressing the reuse, recycling, composting rates, and will include plastic source reduction, which we'll talk about later. Washington, who has passed their bill, they are going to have the performance targets determined during the implementation of their program. Other states in their bill, so they do not have them addressed specifically in their bill. Other states like Oregon address them in the bill themselves, and they have a required recycling rate of 25% by 2028, 50% by 2040, and 70% by 2050. Other states have things more aggressive, and I believe that Lowell probably will get to that a little bit later. They require you to register. They require you to register with a pro, and all but Maine have chosen a pro, in their case, a stewardship organization. They've all chosen a pro, and that has been Circular Action Alliance, which, in my opinion, has been a good thing because CAA, Circular Action Alliance, can help to harmonize, to whatever extent they can, the different requirements that are in each state's bill. The requirement to have registered with a pro for each of the states that producers sell in have already passed. So if you have not registered, I suggest you do that. And for right now, for the 7 states, for the 6 states who have chosen a pro, that would be, of course, CAA. There then is going to be the requirement for data reporting. You're going to need to report data for different purposes, different times of the year. And all but Maine data reporting times have passed. Maine's is going to be later this year. Maine, according to their legislation, should have already chosen a pro. They have moved that out, and they expect that they will choose one third quarter of this year. So then you'd be able to register with them and report data as is necessary according to the pro and the bill. You're then going to receive invoices based upon the data that you reported, and you're going to then have to be paying fees. The legislation requires that the PRO provide to the state a list of producers who are not in compliance. So you want to be registered, you want to be reporting as necessary so that you don't get on that list. Oregon has already reported a list. So next slide, please. So who's involved in EPR? A slide earlier showed that the producer is the center point of developing material that is good and then funding the consumers and how materials will be collected and recycled. The EPRs require the producers to do that. Well, the states, not wanting to have to deal with the thousands of producers in each of their states, have legislated that there will be a producer responsibility organization that will be the central point between the producers and the state. The producers on the right-hand side there, the covered entities, have then one reporting location to give all of their information. And in this case, the PRO so far is Circular Action Alliance. Next slide, please. So the PRO is going to be needing to, according to the legislation, developing a plan, and each state has different timelines for how that will be done, when that will be done, some more quickly than others. The the PRO is going to be collecting the materials. They're going to be coming up with a budget, basically based upon what the state's requirements are and what the needs assessment determines has to be still accomplished. What is it going to take to collect the materials that the state requires be recycled? Because what happens is, as you can imagine, the states that have the enacted laws now, they have differing population densities. Maryland is going to have a more dense population than Oregon is going to have. And it's going to be more difficult for those states that have, like Oregon, to collect the amount of materials, get materials recycled from the more rural locations. So the needs assessment helps the PRO and the advisory board determine how they're going to be able to meet the requirements of the state, what that cost is going to be. Then from the producers that have signed up with the PRO and have reported the materials and the weights and the masses of all of them, they determine how that the funds that are needed to support the budget, how they're going to be divvied up among the producers. Next slide, please. So some states call a producer what you would expect, and it's a person who is using packaging to sell their product, to contain their product, to deliver it to a state. Some of them mean that a producer is a person who meets other obligations. But for the sake of now, we're going to call the producer the entity that is going to be delivering their product into the state. A covered entity now gets more specific, and then it's a producer who meets the requirements of the legislation. There, it can mean that you would think that you're a producer, but because you use packaging. But according to the requirements of who a producer is, you may not be covered, and then you would maybe not need to report. In Washington, for example, their legislation has 2 pages devoted to who a producer is. And then they have 26 different sections and subsections describing who those people are. So it gets very detailed, very difficult maybe to understand if you are a producer for that state. And that is why it's really important that you register with CAA, and they can help you to understand if you truly are a covered entity for that state. Now, next slide, please. So one of the things that determines if you are a covered entity is each state has small business exemptions. They're twofold. One of them is if you are providing the weight of packaging into a state less than a certain amount. And you can see what those weights here are for each of the states. They also include if you have revenue below a certain amount, you would then be exempt from being what we would call or a covered entity, and you would then not be needing to report the information. So what I don't want you to do right now, I don't want you to leave if you feel that you are not meeting these 2 thresholds, because everybody here, if you're below those thresholds, I'm sure you expect that you're going to grow and get to them. In addition, it's a good idea to build your reporting, build your data collection now while you are smaller, so that it becomes routine as you grow and maybe get a little bit more diverse in the materials that you're going to need to report. So The fees that are going to be collected from the producer, next slide, please. The fees that are going to be used to fund all of this, we talked about how incentive is given to the producers to develop packaging that's going to be better for during the end of life, and how it's going to get into maybe or kept out of the environment. One of the things, a term that you probably hear, is eco-modulation, and that means that based upon the different materials that are coming in, how the needs assessment for each state is determining how they can be handled and what the cost is going to be to improve how they're handled. The producers are given improved or penalized fees, giving them the incentive to create better materials, move to better materials. And that's what we refer to, and you're going to hear, as eco-modulation. Next slide, please. So this slide shows from the fees that were collected by Oregon, which has already happened, how for every dollar spent, the money was allocated and dispersed. And what I'd like you to do is take a look at just 4 of them in particular. Look at them all at your leisure, but the 4 that I'd like to talk about is that top one, and that's the money that's going to the garbage collectors and the recyclers and what have you. The next one down is for what they're currently doing. The next one down is what has to be done to improve the collection, to be able to get to the more rural consumer, to provide recycling bins for people who don't have them, to provide composting bins to help segregate materials more easily for the segregation and getting them to a composter or a recycler. The contamination reduction amount is currently, with commingled materials, you're going to have, of course, contamination. Even if you're sorting out compostable materials, depending upon how the consumer can identify the compostable material, how it's labeled, there's going to be a certain amount of contamination that has to be dealt with. And this money is used to help develop programs that can better handle contamination and reduce the amount of contamination that's going to be in there, so that the cost of recycling, the cost of composting is going to be minimized. This last one down here is money going for outreach and education, so that go to the next slide, please. So that consumers are helped to understand how to identify recyclable, compostable, reusable other packaging, and are educated in what to do with them, so the cost of handling commingled materials will become less. Next slide. So an example in the state of Oregon that it's working is from the funds they collected, the fees they collected. You can see how much went to recyclers for upgrades that was given to them by CAA, that was given to them by the producers that CAA collected. You see that there was $3.3 million going to local communities for contamination reduction. The impact also is that more than 50,000 recycling carts were introduced into the state of Oregon, and 14 trucks were added to pick up materials. You can see this amount that is expected to be generated to be given to the other groups that were on that previous slide to help fund in the state of Oregon. So Next slide, please. So the idea is it's a cross-functional challenge. Um, First, you need to determine if you're obligated as a covered entity. You then need to be able to be gathering your information, and then you have to be able to report it. So the big thing is, you know, as many of you said, you've already signed up with a pro. You have already, many of you reported as necessary by the end of May. And there are going to be other timelines that are going to be coming up for different reporting. So hopefully this has given you a little bit of a better understanding of what EPRs are, what the legislation looks like, what's included in them. And I'm going to hand it over now to Lowell, who is going to get into more of the nuts and bolts of the data collection and the fees. So take it away, Lowell.
Awesome. Thank you. I think while we transition to, I think Shannon, I think you're going to launch a second poll
Yep,
while
we are
we do
launching
the
our second poll here. Give people a minute to vote here.
yeah, and I did see a couple great questions come in, so thank you. Keep those coming. We'll address those here in just a few minutes. And also, I know my colleague Melissa, who oversees our marketing, did put a couple of links in the chat for you all. One is for upcoming webinars, as well as actual direct link to the CAA portal registration page.
So it looks like results so far, biggest challenge is source reduction and fee mitigation, followed by data collection and reporting submission. So Lowell, I think
Yeah,
that's in your wheelhouse here.
absolutely. And thank you, Wayne, for getting the stage set. We will cover some of those here. Are you seeing my screen okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I will say that I have given literal half day seminars on this. Um, we will be sending this recording as well as the slide deck. So I'm going to move pretty quickly through some of this, and I do want to get to some of the questions. But suffice it to say that obviously EPR is going to be maturing, as Wayne said, and things are going to get a lot more complex. We'll talk a little bit about diving deeper into California with source reduction, as well as kind of how we anticipate fee schedules getting more complex over time. I do want to state on your screen now, again, Wayne kind of said that we've had this May 31st deadline where a lot of reporting was required. And again, if you haven't, portals remain open. I have to say that the enforcement muscles of the CAA and the states are still forming, but they are forming quickly. But I wanted to call attention that August 1st, and it'll technically be August 3rd because August 1st falls on a weekend, the individual source reduction plans for California will be due. And that is a future looking, right? A lot of the reporting that we've done so far is backwards facing, right? What have you sent into the state? What are the fee categories and covered material categories? And you report and you pay. This ISR is a forward looking statement of what your company is going to do over the next 6 years to reduce the amount of plastic weight and plastic components into the state of California. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Again, as enforcement muscles do begin to develop across these states and the pro, they do reserve the right to flex quite large, so to speak, up to anywhere between $25,000 and $50,000 a day. And again, the budgets that are set in the fee assessment process have to be met. So the registered or reporting producers are going to likely pay a much larger fee to cover the free riders, as they call them, that haven't reported. Those that haven't and then catch up are going to have to pay back fees plus interest. Suffice it to say that Oregon was the first one to go live, and they have begun to send out delinquency notices, etc. So just to say that there's probably more leniency in the infancy of these programs, but as they mature, you're going to see less leniency and flexibility, and reporting timelines and getting yourself caught up. So just be aware of that. A lot of people say, I don't know if this thing's going to stick around or not. I had to redact some of this information, but these are legitimate invoices that were sent out on behalf of Oregon through the CAA. And again, it's pretty cut and dry once it's all said and done as far as, what materials did you send to the state, how much did you send, and here is your fee, here's what you have to pay. And again, we saw Wayne kind of go over a little bit about what Oregon's been doing with that money. But invoices are real, the dates are real. So kudos to those of you that have already done your reporting. And hopefully it gets a little easier as time goes on. For those of you that haven't, what we're seeing is basically these be broken down into two different installments, one in typically January and then another one in mid-year in July. Um, for those program dues. And then for a state like California, where again, it's just ramping up and initial reporting is done, there's been things that are called early fees or startup fees. Um, and I always warn brands that those are not really what should be used to like budget for the next year because they're not indicative of the total categorical breakdown. Instead of like in California, for instance, there's 95 material categories from paper to metal to plastics. Um, they basically say here are 8 kind of super categories, and then they use that to just get the program started, get CAA set up, and all that sort of stuff. So we've seen some brands make that mistake of saying, "Oh, here's my early fees. I'll just use that to budget for the next year," and they are typically much, much higher because again, there's a lot more data to report. Um, so I wanted to take a moment to talk about the biggest elephant in the room that we've been talking a ton about, which is um, California's source reduction plan that is due August 3rd. And again, any liable producer has to generate this. Now, I want to make very clear when you see 25% source reduction, 100 or 10% reuse and refill and elimination, and that 65% recycling rate, that is not an individual producer responsibility. That is for the pro to collectively evaluate all participating producers and deliver that back to the state. What you as a producer will be responsible for is the one on the left by making all of your packaging recyclable or compostable by that 2032 deadline. And again, I've heard arguments of, well, if we're making consistent investments in infrastructure, what's not recyclable today may be recyclable in 2028 or 2030 or 2032. So it's important, as Wayne said, to just make sure that you're staying up to date on these things. Have an organization that you rely on. CAA puts a tremendous amount of resources and workbooks and guides in their CAA portal. Obviously, our organization is very laser focused on this and building technology that essentially acts as a TurboTax for that to keep brands up to date, aware, and in compliance. But this is going to be one of those things that I think is probably the most challenging because it's a binding agreement over the next 6 years between your organization and the state that says, here's what my company is going to do to minimize plastic weight and the number of plastic components. Um, so they outline some approved pathways, and again, don't have the time today to dive into these because we could probably do 30 to 40 minutes on each. But there's basically depending on what industry you serve, whether it's food and bev, things like reuse and refill likely not going to be that viable. But this allows companies to basically pick and choose. Maybe can I add more PCR content to my packaging and get incentives for that? Can I right size or lightweight or do concentration or bulking? Can I switch from flexible to a more mono or a paper? Or can I get rid of things that are just not needed in my packaging that aren't going to affect the safety or delivery? Um, yeah, and again, this was done because of just how much material is flowing into the state of California. It's a very large state economically, geographically, and you can kind of see here there were over 170 billion plastic components that flowed into the state based on the initial baseline numbers and the fee assessment or the assessments that were done by Cal Recycle and CAA. So they are mandating in this law in Senate Bill 54 that brands do their part and sign an agreement with the state to reduce both the tonnage to overall weight and the actual number of components, because those become very hard for material recovery facilities to actually sort and divert from landfill in general. Um, what you'll see in this presentation that again you're going to get after we're done today are some things like this, some decision trees and things that again I'm not going to take time today to go through, but I think are kind of like good takeaways and maybe some homework for you all to study up on as you begin or advance your EPR journey, depending on where you're at. But this is something that our team put together that can just kind of help you step through, how to think about how to start those initial steps of getting ISRs, those independent and individual source reduction plans put together. And as I said, right, we've kind of blown through 2026 where it's happened so fast. Like Wayne said, since COVID, we've seen this massive increase in EPR laws. And I personally think that, as the world changed, uh, everyone switched from going to the store to having things delivered. And I think everyone started to see how much stuff was sitting on the curb. So we've had this very quick adoption of these things. So while we've, come and gone to this initial reporting for 6 states, again, portals remain open. But if you have done those initial reports, now it's really time to think critically about how you're going to put your company on the line over the next 6 years for these source reduction plans. And if you need help with that, again, our team is always willing, able, and standing by to help brands with these sort of challenges. Um, the next few slides, I, I think, are an important illustration of the complexity of how fees can get out of control real quick if your data is not right. Obviously, I'm a bit biased because I'm a technologist by trade. But in California, it's not just how much supply did you send in, and here's the fee associated with that category of material. They have that base fee, but they've added things like a reuse investment fee, a plastic pollution mitigation fee, both for the total weight and the componentry of those plastic components that end up, you know, totaling for this entire fee structure in California. And again, I had to redact some stuff because these are privileged for registered producers only. Obviously, we have hundreds of customers that we get to work on behalf of inside of their portals, but I thought this was a useful slide to share. Now, this slide here is an illustrative look at what California fee schedule looks like. Again, on the left, you have your material class. Again, I mentioned there's 95 of those, so this is just a screenshot of one page that says here's the material class and category, and then they give a per pound fee, right? So you can see ceramics and plastic rigids and flexibles all kind of vary, and you can see flexibles, specifically PVC and flexible films, are up on the upper end of that total base fee. Then you've got the reuse investment fee, the plastic pollution mitigation fee, and then the component fee for that monetization fund as well. So again, not as easy as for those of you that just did Colorado and Oregon. We're looking at a much more complex and much more granular data exercise. And again, if you have gaps in your data, you're making assumptions using formulaic apportionment, um, you could be paying more than you should, or you could be wildly underreporting, which also isn't good because those things, just like when you do your taxes, will typically be audited and rectified later on. Um, I wanted to also show again, right? That's California, 95 categories, multiple ways that they're basically tacking on and calculating fees versus like we saw in Oregon, 60 to I think 65 categories of materials, but uh, pretty basic for what they had in their published fees. And again, I do want to say that this is illustrative, and we won't get finalization for the fee schedules in California until later this year. But we've seen that these haven't varied too greatly from what they initially put in the plan to what actually gets ratified. But I did want to, in Oregon here, again, focus on flexibles. Um, we saw what is 69 cents a pound in California and Oregon. They are putting a higher premium on flexibles. You could see that's about $1.02 a pound for those flexible and film items, for the polypropylenes and things like that. So, whether you're a supplier or you're a brand, um, in California, you're going to have to not only think about what are you paying, but how are you going to commit your company over the coming years to finding alternatives, making changes and adjustments, not only for your own economic gain, but for the commitments that you're going to make in your individual source reduction plan. And then, like Wayne said, obviously each state has a mechanism of saying, we want to change behavior. So we're going to give you a carrot if you're good or a stick if you're bad, the bonus, malus, the incentive, disincentive. Um, so in California, again, um, you know, there's a number of ways that you can apply and get bonused or incented for behavior. And in Oregon, it's very much based on life cycle assessments. So impact to environment versus more of the passive factors in like Colorado. So again, the more data, the more granular and complete your data package that you're reporting on, the better you're going to be able to understand and apply and understand. It's just like doing your taxes, right? Um, where can I get, you know, where can I find ways that I can get, credits to and reduce my overall tax burden? This is very much the same way. And again, if you have very lacking data or understanding of all the different things that you do, you're probably going to miss out on what these states are putting out as far as what they're willing to pay you to do the right thing. And you may have already done it and just can't prove it and therefore qualify for those. Um, and then the other thing I see a lot is people kind of overlook, the tremendous amount of exemptions that exist. There are a lot of them, and a lot of brands may have things that they have in their packaging supply chain that do, or maybe their products fall into these. So, understanding what those frameworks, whether it's de minimis exemptions or just overall packaging exemptions, those are good things to know just so you can get those credits along the way. Um, do we have time for another poll? And then I know we've got some questions, so I'm gonna, okay, so yeah, I did see the third poll get brought up here. And this is just, we're kind of interested in understanding, how, if people are putting together teams internally, if they're relying on outside expertise. Uh, Obviously, for me, I'm always hopeful that people lean into technology and digital platforms. So, um,
It's looking like most people have somebody on staff already who are taking on these responsibilities in addition to their regular job duties. That
hey,
one's
let's give them a gift card, should we? I think we should. Let's, maybe buy them something nice, stop by their office, tell them thanks. Oftentimes I've seen that they're kind of like an accidental owner. They said they were in a meeting and someone said, "Hey, what's this EPR stuff all about?" Someone says, "Oh, I'll look into it." Lo and behold, now you're the EPR compliance officer for your company. So, tip of the cap to you all for doing that. But if it gets too much, if the weight becomes too much, call your pal Lowell. I'll give you a hand. Um, so again, our team has put together some awesome resources. I again would encourage you all to go to repurpose.global/resources. A lot of free stuff that I think a lot of consultants are charging for. And I know Melissa's going to be putting that stuff in the chat. So please go take a look at that. We've got some great step-by-step guides on how you can make better sense of how to work internally with your teams. So going from like a hectic, image like this where there's no clear owner and there's late reports given and you're behind the ball, we can help you clean things up. And again, just by free resources of showing and sharing what we know to be true based on the hundreds of brands and probably thousands of reports that we've submitted on behalf of brands over the past year and a half. So, again, things from common missteps and common mistakes that people make we are on a mission to share the unique information that we've gathered working and reporting on behalf of brands in so many different types of industries, from food and beverage to beauty to automotive to furniture. Um, we do see some commonalities. People getting stuck up on waiting for all the perfect data and waiting from suppliers to give them stuff, um, classifying things wrong. We've saved brands hundreds of thousands of dollars just by helping them classify their tubs or cups or plastic or PP or PE material properly. Because again, you saw in those slides where it can go from 30 cents a pound up to $1 per pound, and you got to be very particular on how you input that data and information. Um, One of the things, again, happy to be here with Eagle Flexible. We try to partner with organizations from associations and working groups, but a lot of suppliers hold a lot of information that liable producers need. Luckily you have Wayne and their great team. If you are, using a lot of their stuff, they're going to be able to get you that so you can report. But if you have other suppliers that are overseas or non-communicational, we built a strategy guide for streamlining your supplier data collection from before you outreach. Because again, not everyone's going to be like Wayne and know what the hell's going on. A lot of them are too far removed, and when you ask for EPR reporting data specs, they're going to be like, "This is spam," and I have no idea. It doesn't even sound real. Um, so everything from initial outreach to what you need to ask for, how you need to ask for it, we've got those guides. Um, and through all of that, like I said, we have built, I like to describe it as a TurboTax for EPR compliance, taking months of work into a matter of hours. We were taking brands all the way up to the deadline and getting their data centralized, normalized, properly put together for reporting and got them in compliance. And then last week, our amazing team launched our packaging simulator, which gives brands the ability. So again, if you know you are looking and saying, man, we're getting hammered on these four specific categories in California or Oregon, our platform allows you to basically simulate what if I wanted to go from this material to that one. It would show you how you're going to save on EPR fees over the coming years, but also for things like source reduction and plastic component reduction. Um, so our team has done a tremendous job of really breaking this down, building into state by state logic. As Wayne said, like these states, as similar as they could possibly be, they're still very different. Um, so we've been able to really take all of the pain and struggle out of that, just the same way that trying to navigate the US tax code on your own if you have a business and things like that can be a little complex. Our team is trying to give you the ability and insights to forecast what you need to be budgeting to pay, and then again giving you the power in the application to actually begin to model things out before you go through some sort of massive packaging change or overall. So um, if you've done this once and you're like, I don't ever want to do that again, fear not. Our team is here, and we've got a great application that you should check out for sure. Um, let's get to some questions, shall we?
Yeah, thank you, Lowell and Wayne. That was great. We do have some questions from the chat, and looks like this one kind of goes along, Lowell, with what you were just talking about. This person asked, some of our products are in flexible formats that have multiple components like zippers, spouts, vents, etc. How do these components impact their reporting?
Yeah, it's a great question. And honestly, like the biggest change, right, outside of like in California, um, you're going to have to determine are those detachable or non-detachable components. And like I said, in those individual source reduction plans, it's not just about the total weight of plastics, it's about the number of components. So those, if they are detachable, are going to be considered a separate component. So you're going to have a separate reporting category for that. And then you're going to have to have a separate plan for how you're going to address the overall long-term number of plastic components that are on that specific package. Um, and again, in places like Oregon or Colorado where there's not the component level, you're going to have to determine what is the majority of that specific component. If it's a plastic or a paper component with a non-detachable, plastic zipper or something like that, you'll have to kind of understand how that's, what your specific format is so that it matches that specific category so that you're getting an accurate representation and categorical classification. Um, but I think overall, it's like the more stuff you have, the more complex it typically gets, especially in places like California. And Wayne, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
No, I think you covered it pretty well. We've got another question I think was a good one that saying, hey, we've already addressed our packaging and feel we're as sustainable as we can be. Are we still going to get additional fees? Not knowing what your package is and what you've been able to do to address that, I'd like to better understand if there's more work that could be done, right? Because there are different ways to improve the sustainability, make it more recyclable, add PCR. In some cases, you're not going to be maybe able to. Maybe you can reduce the headspace in your package, reducing the mass of it. Maybe reduce the thickness of the materials. Although, we've been doing that for 15 years with customers. So Lowell, in regard to the additional fees, how would you answer that?
I would say so in California specifically, where this is the big thing, you can report any improvements that you made from 2013 to 2022 because the baseline that they're using to measure against is baseline 2023. So the 10-year prior period where you've maybe done a lot of that work, you can get incentives and recoup some of that cost. And then as far as your reduction plan, you can basically say like, hey, I've already done a lot of this work and there's really no room for improvement. Um, the unfortunate reality is if you've done that, you're still going to have to report if you're a liable entity in that state and continue to pay those fees. Um, and then pay attention to how those eco-modulation frameworks evolve over time to see if maybe you can qualify in the future. But they are kind of an inevitability. But again, this is going to be a very evolutionary thing over the next, 5 to 10 years in each state specifically.
Yeah, and it's important to realize that the legislation requires that the programs be evaluated every couple of years, right? Every 3, 4, 5 years, and they will change because, as Lowell, touched on, recycling processes will change, so things will be more easily kept out of landfills.
Well, thank
Absolutely.
you,
And I know
Wayne, and thank you, Lowell, for all your great insight. Much appreciated to our attendees. Thank you so much for joining today. Please feel free to reach out anytime. We're always happy to answer whatever questions you have, whether you're a customer or not. Here's Wayne and Lowell's contact information. You can reach out directly to them at any time. Any final thoughts as we're over 1 minute?
I would say, and I know this is Wayne, like your big thing is like just sign up with the pro, whether you're liable today or not. Keep up to date. Um, don't suffer in silence either. Phone a friend. Okay, this can drive you nuts. But sign up, get to know it, get comfortable and understanding what these things are doing, and try to keep your eye on the big picture of what we're trying to achieve with these programs.
Yeah, and I think for the producers, figure out a routine way that you're going to be collecting data for all of your packaging so that as you add a new SKU to your portfolio, you've already got the way that you're going to get that information.
All right, great. Well, we will try to follow up with some of the other questions within the next week or so. But again, thank you everyone for joining, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.